For 108 years, since the year 1917, the United States of America held the highest credit rating that any nation on earth can receive from the Moody's rating agency. Through World War I, through the Great Depression, through World War II, through Vietnam, through stagflation, through the Cold War, through 9/11, through the 2008 financial crisis, through the pandemic. For 108 years, no matter what storm hit this country, Moody's looked at America's books and said this nation pays its debts. On May 16th of 2025, Moody's took that rating away, and with that single decision, they completed something that had never happened before in American history. All three major credit rating agencies on planet Earth have now downgraded the United States of America from AAA. S&P pulled the rating in August of 2011. Fitch pulled it in August of 2023. And Moody's, the last holdout, the 116-year-old agency that had rated U.S. bonds since 1993 and assigned a country ceiling rating of AAA since 1949, finally joined them 19 months ago. And what most Americans do not realize is that this downgrade is not a symbolic event. It is not a political talking point. It is a formal, public declaration by the three most respected financial judgment institutions on Earth that the United States government is no longer the safest borrower in the world. That the money your country owes is less certain to be paid back than the debts of Germany, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, Singapore, and 8 other countries that still hold perfect AAA ratings from all three agencies. And because every mortgage rate, every auto loan rate, every credit card APR, every business loan, every student loan, and every corporate bond in America is priced off U.S. Treasury yields, the downgrade does not just affect Washington. It affects every single financial decision you have made or will ever make. And no American is safe from the consequences. And I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes explaining why, with the data, with the history, with the specific numbers that will show you exactly what this means for your savings, your retirement, your mortgage, your children, and the purchasing power of every dollar you currently own. The three downgrades. Nobody put together for you. 3 agencies, 3 different years, 3 different administrations, 3 different political justifications, and one unmistakable pattern. Standard & Poor's, the oldest and most widely followed rating agency in the world, downgraded the United States from AAA to AA+ on August 5th of 2011. The reason S&P gave at the time was not primarily about math, it was about governance. S&P wrote in their downgrade rationale that what concerned them most was the prolonged controversy over raising the statutory debt ceiling and the related fiscal policy debate, and the weakening effectiveness, stability, and predictability of American policymaking and political institutions. Read that sentence again. A credit rating agency looked at the United States Congress and concluded that the institutions themselves were becoming unreliable. 12 years later, on August 1st of 2023, Fitch Ratings delivered the second downgrade, again moving the U.S. from AAA to AA+. Fitch cited what they called an erosion of governance over the previous 2 decades, specifically pointing to repeated debt ceiling standoffs that had brought the country to the brink of technical default. Fitch also cited the rising fiscal burden from Social Security and Medicare, which together account for the largest growing line items in the federal budget. And then on May 16th of 2025, Moody's delivered the third downgrade, moving the U.S. from OAA to OAA1. The Moody's statement said the downgrade reflected the increase over more than a decade in government debt and interest payment ratios to levels that are significantly higher than similarly rated sovereigns. Moody's specifically warned that __quote _4 _ and that _quote _5 _. Let me translate that from rating agency language into plain English. Moody's looked at the One Big Beautiful Bill Act being debated in Congress at the exact moment of their downgrade and said that the legislation would not fix the problem. And they downgraded the country preemptively because the political system is not capable of producing a solution. The 3 downgrades, spanning 14 years, read like a medical chart. In 2011, the warning was institutional. By 2023, the warning was structural. And by 2025, the warning was existential. And at no point in those 14 years did Congress pass a single piece of legislation that reversed the trajectory. Every single policy change in that period made the debt and deficit worse, not better. The rating agencies watched, they warned again. And finally, one by one, they concluded that America is no longer creditworthy at the highest level. The numbers behind the downgrades are worse than the agencies even admitted. Publicly held debt in the United States was 34% of gross domestic product in the year 2000. By the time S&P delivered the first downgrade in 2011, that figure had nearly doubled to 65% of GDP. The debt has now reached 100% of GDP. 100%. The last time the United States held debt at this level was at the end of World War II, when the country had literally just fought a world war. The difference is that in 1945, debt was 100% of GDP because of an extraordinary, non-discretionary existential conflict. In 2026, debt is 100% of GDP in peacetime during an economic expansion with no war to justify it. Interest payments on the national debt in 2020 were $514.7 billion. By the first quarter of 2025, according to St. Louis Federal Reserve economic data, interest payments hit $1.114 trillion, a near doubling in 5 years, and interest payments have now crossed $1 trillion per year for the first time in American history, which is more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare, and roughly equal to Social Security. Interest payments on U.S. Treasury debt now account for 34% of U.S. tax revenue, which means 34 cents of every dollar you pay in federal taxes goes to paying the interest on money the government already borrowed. Not to infrastructure, not to defense, not to Medicare, not to veterans, not to your Social Security, to interest. And Moody's projected that by 2035, interest payments will consume 30% of federal revenue on a run-rate basis, up from approximately 9% just a decade ago. That is a more than tripling of the government's most fixed, non-negotiable expense in just 10 years. And Fitch independently calculated that the deficit is running at $1.05 trillion in the current fiscal year, 13% higher than the previous year. Not only is the debt climbing, the rate at which it is climbing is accelerating. Under current law, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center, public debt is projected to grow between 5.5% and 6% each year over the next decade, far above the 4% nominal economic growth that has been the norm this century. When debt grows faster than the economy year after year, the math becomes inescapable. Eventually, every dollar of new revenue is consumed by debt service. Eventually, the government is operating purely to feed the interest machine it created. And the rating agencies, whose entire job is to spot that trajectory before it becomes catastrophic, have now unanimously concluded that America is on it. What the downgrade did to your mortgage and your credit card bill within weeks. Rating downgrades do not remain theoretical. They show up immediately in the bond market, and the bond market shows up immediately in the rates every American pays on every type of debt. Within days of the Moody's downgrade on May 16, 2025, the 30-year Treasury yield climbed to just over 5%, and the 10-year Treasury yield, which mortgage rates track most closely, rose to nearly 4.5%. The average interest rate for a 30-year fixed mortgage temporarily rose above 7%, according to Mortgage News Daily. And those are not small movements. On a $400,000 mortgage, the difference between a 6% rate and a 7% rate is approximately $265 per month. Over the life of a 30-year loan, that single percentage point cost the homeowner $95,400 in additional interest payments. That is a full year of income for the median American household. Gone. Paid to bondholders. Because the country got downgraded, and the same dynamic cascades through every other category of consumer debt. Credit card interest rates, which are already at record highs, climbed further after the downgrade. Average APRs on new credit card offers approached 23%. Auto loan rates for new cars rose past 7%. Auto loan rates for used cars crossed 11%. Student loan rates, which are set by Treasury yields plus a margin, jumped for the 2025 to 2026 academic year. And business loans, the lifeblood of every small business in America, became materially more expensive to obtain, which means fewer new businesses, fewer hires, and slower wage growth. Every one of those rate increases is a direct tax on ordinary Americans. But it is not called a tax. It is called the cost of capital. And the cost of capital rose because 3 rating agencies, in sequence over 14 years, concluded that America can no longer be trusted to manage its own finances. Here is something most Americans never learn. When Fitch downgraded the U.S. in August of 2023, the 10-year Treasury yield jumped from 4% in late July to 5% by mid-October. That single 100 basis point move added hundreds of dollars to every monthly mortgage payment on a new loan for the remainder of that year. Moody's in 2025 extended the trend. And every future downgrade, which is now being openly discussed by analysts at every major investment bank, would compound it further. The downgrades are not separate events. They are a cumulative pressure that is slowly pricing America out of its own credit system. The banks they downgraded next, and why your checking account is quietly riskier than you think. On May 19th of 2025, 3 days after Moody's downgraded the country, the same agency downgraded the long-term ratings of JPMorgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. The reason was purely mechanical. Those banks hold enormous quantities of U.S. Treasury securities as their primary safety assets. If Treasuries are now considered slightly riskier, then the banks that hold trillions of dollars worth of them are also slightly riskier. Which sounds technical until you realize what it actually means for the money you keep in your checking account, your savings account, and your money market fund. When banks receive credit downgrades, their funding costs rise. They have to pay more to borrow from other banks in the overnight market. They have to pay more to issue corporate bonds. Their stock prices become more volatile. Their capital requirements become more stringent. And ultimately, those higher costs get passed to customers in the form of lower interest rates on deposits and higher fees on services. The average savings account at a large national bank is currently paying an interest rate of 0.01%. Not 0.1%, 0.01%, while inflation runs at 2.7 to 3% per year, depending on the month, which means the real return on the cash sitting in your checking account at JPMorgan or Bank of America is negative 2.99% per year. Every year that money sits there, it loses purchasing power faster than almost any other asset class in America. And the bank downgrade makes this worse, not better, because the bank now has less incentive to compete for your deposits. They know you are not going anywhere. They know switching banks is a hassle. They know that most Americans do not understand that the $250,000 FDIC insurance limit has not been raised since 2010, which means in real inflation-adjusted terms, your federal depositor protection has shrunk by approximately 31% over the past 16 years. A dollar of FDIC protection in 2010 is worth about 69 cents of protection today. And if a regional bank or even a major bank were to face the kind of stress that Moody's just flagged as more probable, the FDIC guarantee only covers you up to that shrunken limit. Anything above $250,000 is, in an extreme event, subject to loss. This is not alarmism. This is exactly what happened at Silicon Valley Bank in March of 2023. Most depositors there had balances far above $250,000 because it was a business bank. The Treasury and Fed ultimately extended emergency guarantees beyond the FDIC limit to prevent contagion, but that was a discretionary intervention. There is no legal requirement for the federal government to do it again. And in a fiscal environment where the rating agencies have already warned that the government's capacity to respond to crises is weakening, the next discretionary bailout is not guaranteed. The dollar is losing its monopoly, and the downgrades accelerated the trend. Approximately 59% of global foreign exchange reserves are held in U.S. dollars. That number was 71% in 2000. The dollar share of global reserves has declined by 12 percentage points in 25 years, and the rate of decline has accelerated noticeably since the 2011 S&P downgrade. Every time a rating agency signals that America is less creditworthy, foreign central banks quietly rebalance their reserves, not all at once, not in a panic, but steadily, methodically, over years. The People's Bank of China has reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings from a peak of $1.3 trillion in 2013 to approximately $760 billion today. That is a 42% reduction. Gold, which central banks purchase as an alternative reserve asset, has been bought at record quantities by central banks in China, India, Russia, Turkey, and Poland for 4 consecutive years. The People's Bank of China alone added over 225 tons of gold to its reserves in 2024 and has continued accumulating throughout 2025. The market price of gold recently crossed $4,500 per ounce, approximately triple what it was just a few years ago. That price movement is not speculation. It is the collective judgment of every major central bank on Earth that dollar-denominated assets are no longer the safest store of value. And when the dollar's role as reserve currency erodes, Americans pay the price. The extra demand for dollars that kept interest rates low for decades begins to fade. Import prices, which have historically been suppressed by dollar strength, begin to rise. Foreign countries become less willing to finance the U.S. deficit at low rates, which forces the Treasury to offer higher yields to attract the same dollar volume, which again pushes up mortgage rates, credit card rates, and every other consumer borrowing cost in the American economy. The downgrades by the rating agencies formalize and accelerate this process. They tell every central bank, every sovereign wealth fund, and every institutional investor on Earth that the U.S. government is a slightly riskier bet than it was before. And those investors, collectively managing tens of trillions of dollars, slowly but inexorably move capital towards safer alternatives. Which means the privilege that the United States has enjoyed for 80 years, the privilege of borrowing in its own currency at the lowest rates on Earth, is being steadily revoked by the market, based on the publicly stated judgments of agencies that have no political motive and whose entire business model depends on accurately assessing credit risk. The downgrades are not an opinion. They are a data-driven verdict, and the verdict is that America has lost its edge. And there is one more consequence of the reserve currency erosion that most Americans never hear discussed. The quote _6_ of issuing the world's reserve currency has allowed the United States to run persistent trade deficits and fiscal deficits for decades without the currency collapse that would have punished any other country making the same choices. That privilege is a subsidy worth hundreds of billions of dollars per year in lower interest rates, cheaper imports, and greater fiscal flexibility. Every percentage point that the dollar loses in global reserve composition is a small withdrawal of that subsidy, and the cumulative withdrawal over the 12 points of reserve share that the dollar has already lost since 2000 is measured in the trillions of dollars. That is wealth that used to flow to American households and businesses through cheaper financing and lower prices. It is now flowing elsewhere, and the 3 credit downgrades have accelerated the outflow. International agencies joined the downgrade choir, and most Americans never heard about it. The 3 U.S.-based rating agencies are not the only voices in sovereign credit analysis. There are major international agencies that also rate the United States, and their decisions, while less widely covered, have reinforced the same downward trajectory. Scope Ratings, the largest European rating agency, placed the United States on negative watch in 2024 and followed with its own notch downgrade later that year, citing essentially the same concerns that Moody's would cite 6 months later. The Japan Credit Rating Agency, which rates sovereigns from an Asian perspective, has also adjusted its outlook on U.S. debt downward. Dagong Global, the Chinese rating agency, has maintained a rating significantly below the AAA level on U.S. debt for years and downgraded the country further after the 2023 debt ceiling crisis. Egan-Jones, a smaller but respected U.S. rating agency, downgraded the United States in 2011 alongside S&P and has maintained that downgrade ever since. The convergence of global rating judgment is remarkable. From New York to London to Frankfurt to Tokyo to Beijing, the professional institutions that exist specifically to assess sovereign creditworthiness have independently reached similar conclusions using different methodologies, different data sets, and different political frames. That is what makes the downgrade story different from a political narrative. You can dismiss Moody's as an American agency if you want. You cannot dismiss a global convergence of rating opinions across 5 continents as a coordinated political attack. It is a market phenomenon, and that phenomenon is speaking clearly. Every rating agency on Earth with the authority and methodology to publicly evaluate U.S. creditworthiness has reduced its rating from the highest level. Meanwhile, the same agencies continue to maintain perfect AAA ratings on Germany, Switzerland, Singapore, Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Luxembourg, Australia, and Canada. Those 10 countries are currently rated higher by global credit institutions than the United States of America. 10 countries, some of them smaller than a single U.S. state, some of them with a fraction of the military and economic power that America possesses, but none of them carrying a debt-to-GDP ratio of 100%, none of them with an interest payment burden consuming more than 1/3 of tax revenue, none of them with rating agencies publicly warning about the erosion of their governing institutions. The rating is not about power. It is about the willingness and the capacity to pay. And on both counts, America has lost the professional confidence of the global financial establishment. Why the next downgrade may arrive within 24 months and what it will cost you. Every major rating agency publishes what is called an outlook alongside the rating itself. The outlook tells investors where the rating is most likely to move next. Stable means the rating is expected to hold. Negative means a further downgrade is possible within 12 to 24 months. Positive means an upgrade is possible. After the Moody's downgrade of May 2025, every rating agency rating on the U.S. is now at AA+ or AA1 with outlooks that range from stable to mildly negative. Multiple Wall Street analysts, including strategists at Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and JPMorgan, have published research notes in the past several months suggesting that a further downgrade to AA flat is increasingly plausible if Congress does not pass meaningful fiscal reform by 2026 or 2027. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act added an estimated $4.7 trillion to the national debt through 2035, according to multiple independent analyses. That bill by itself is enough to push the debt trajectory into territory that rating agencies have previously said would warrant further downgrades. Moody's used specific language in their May 2025 statement. They said successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of large annual fiscal deficits, and explicitly warned that fiscal performance is expected to deteriorate further. A second Moody's downgrade would move the U.S. from AA1 to AA2. A second S&P or Fitch downgrade would move the U.S. from AA+ to AA flat. And at AA flat, many institutional investment mandates and regulatory frameworks start to treat U.S. Treasuries differently. Some pension funds that are required to hold majority exposure to AA+ or higher sovereign debt would have to reduce U.S. exposure. Some insurance companies would have to adjust capital reserves. Some foreign central banks that have internal guidelines for the credit quality of their reserves would face pressure to diversify further. The move from AA+ to AA in isolation would appear to be a small step. The consequence cascade from that small step could be substantial. And the 10-year Treasury yield would likely rise another 50 to 100 basis points, which means mortgage rates at 8%, auto loan rates over 9%, credit card rates approaching 26%, student loan rates climbing past 8%. Every bill, every rate, every cost, up again. And that second downgrade, based on what the rating agencies themselves have said in public, may be less than 24 months away if Congress does not change course. And nothing in the current fiscal legislation suggests Congress is changing course. What you can do right now before the next downgrade arrives. Here is what you do not see on financial television. When a country loses its top credit rating, the reporters who cover it breathlessly treat it as a one-day story, a market headline, a brief segment, and then they move on to the next shiny object. But the consequences of the downgrade play out over years. And the people who position themselves in the months after the downgrade are the people who preserve their wealth. The people who do not are the people who wake up 3 years later and wonder where their purchasing power went. So let me give you the framework. First, lock in fixed rates on any debt you want to keep. If you have a mortgage at 4%, do not refinance it. If you have student loans with a variable rate component, consider refinancing to fixed now before further downgrades push fixed rates higher. If you have an auto loan at a decent rate, pay on schedule and do not upgrade the car because the next loan will cost materially more. Second, pay down variable rate debt aggressively. Credit card balances, home equity lines of credit tied to the prime rate, and business lines of credit all adjust upward as Treasury yields rise. Every dollar of variable rate debt you eliminate before the next downgrade saves you compounding interest for years. Third, spread your cash across multiple FDIC-insured institutions. The $250,000 limit per depositor per institution is absolute. If you are above that at any single bank, the excess is unprotected. With the top U.S. banks already downgraded by Moody's in May of 2025, this matters more than at any time since 2008. Fourth, consider some non-dollar exposure. I'm not telling you what to buy. I'm telling you that when every rating agency on Earth has downgraded the dollar-issuing country and central banks globally are buying gold at record pace, the signal is clear. Full dollar exposure is a concentrated bet on a country that the rating agencies have now told you 3 times over is less creditworthy than it used to be. Fifth, if you are retired or near retirement, reconsider the assumption that U.S. Treasuries are risk-free. They are still extremely safe, but they are no longer the safest. Global diversification of fixed income exposure, even at modest percentages, hedges against the continuation of the downgrade trajectory. Sixth, pay attention. Every fiscal development between now and the end of 2027 will either avert or accelerate the next downgrade. You cannot control Congress, but you can control what you do with the signals Congress sends. Let me close by speaking directly to every American watching this. For 108 years, Moody's held a perfect credit rating on the United States. For 244 years since the founding of this republic, America has been paying its debts, meeting its obligations, and earning the trust of lenders around the world. That history was not accidental. It was built by generations of Americans who showed up, worked hard, paid their taxes, served their country, and asked their leaders to behave responsibly with the money those taxes provided. What has happened in the past 14 years, culminating in the Moody's downgrade of May 2025, is a verdict not on the American people, but on the institutions that govern them. The rating agencies are telling us in the clearest possible language that the United States Congress and the United States executive branch have collectively failed to manage the finances of this country responsibly for more than a decade. Not one party, both parties, across 4 administrations, across 7 Congresses. The pattern is bipartisan. The failure is bipartisan. The consequences will be bipartisan, and no American is safe from them. Not the retiree living on Social Security because the Social Security Trust Fund is draining and every rating downgrade makes Congress less able to fix it. Not the homeowner because every downgrade adds to mortgage rates. Not the young family trying to save for a house because every downgrade makes saving in dollars less valuable. Not the small business owner because every downgrade makes business credit more expensive. Not the saver, not the worker, not the retiree, not the investor. No American is safe anymore. Because the protective cushion that America's AAA rating provided for a century has now been withdrawn, one notch at a time, by the 3 most respected credit judgment institutions on earth. And the lesson of every other country that has walked this path, from the United Kingdom's downgrade in 2013 to France's multiple downgrades over the past decade, is that the rating never goes back up in any reasonable time frame. Countries that lose AAA rarely recover it within a generation. Which means the America that my parents grew up in, an America that borrowed at the lowest rates on earth and was trusted unconditionally by every creditor on the planet, is not the America your grandchildren will inherit. Unless something changes. Unless the political class that created this trajectory is held accountable at the ballot box and forced to behave responsibly. Until then, every American is paying the price of the downgrades, whether they know it or not. Share this video with every American you know because the mainstream financial press has systematically failed to connect these dots in language ordinary people can understand. No one should have to learn this from the foreclosure letter, from the denied loan, from the dwindling savings balance, from the inflation that ate their retirement. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I will be tracking every downgrade watch, every Moody's, Fitch, and S&P statement, every new deficit projection, and every fiscal development that moves the trajectory in real time. No spin, no party line, just the truth about the financial future of this country and what it means for your money. Take care of yourselves out there. Clarity is the most valuable thing you can give someone right now.